If Marcus Aurelius lived in the age of social media, he wouldn't be posting status updates. He'd be the calm stone in the middle of the storm, unmoved, unshaken. And if you're a man living in today's world, this is what you need more than ever. The world around you is loud. It's reactive. It pulls you to speak quickly, to prove yourself, to chase validation. But Marcus wouldn't play that game. He'd remind you, true power isn't about noise. It's about stillness. It's about choosing your response. And mastering yourself before trying to master anything else. Because in this chaotic world, what we need isn't more opinion. What we need is more men rooted in clarity, discipline, and quiet strength. 1. Stop waiting for the world to approve your truth, live it unapologetically. Don't wait for society's approval to live your truth. Let's be honest. How many times have you held back what you really thought? How many times have you stayed silent, even when you knew you were right, just to avoid being judged? And how many times have you worn the mask that the world expected, while your true self slowly withered in silence? If Marcus Aurelius lived today, in the era of TikTok, Twitter storms, cancel culture, and digital noise from millions of uncensored minds, he'd look you dead in the eyes and say, "You don't need permission to be real. Only the weak wait for approval." Here's the truth. Modern culture preaches be authentic, as long as your truth fits the mainstream. It celebrates freedom, until your freedom challenges their narrative. You're told to be yourself, as long as yourself makes no one uncomfortable. That's the trap. And as a man, you must see through it before you lose yourself completely. Direct hit Stoicism doesn't teach you to fight the world, it teaches you to never let the world define you. Marcus lived in a time of rebellion, corruption, and political chaos. A single whisper in the palace could mean death. And even as an emperor, he never lived to please the people. He lived to honor his inner compass, even if he was the only one who understood it. Today, death doesn't come by sword, it comes from self-doubt, from being molded by the crowd, from living your entire life on someone else's terms. Every time you silence yourself to keep the peace, you disappear a little more. Every time you shrink back for fear of being misunderstood, you become less visible to yourself. Ask yourself this. If you truly know who you are, why would you need anyone else to confirm it? Fire, let this be your wake-up call. You weren't born to be a copy of culture. You weren't born to be a version that's acceptable. You were born to be a version that's true, even if no one else understands it. Pause for a moment. Think about this. How many dreams have you buried because you felt not enough? How many passions have you hidden because you feared being laughed at? How long have you lived to make others comfortable, while suffocating your own truth? Marcus would remind you. Don't trade your soul for applause. Don't betray yourself for belonging. The world won't stop to validate you. It's too busy chasing noise, drama, and trends. But that doesn't mean your voice doesn't matter. In fact, your refusal to blend in is what makes you powerful. White heavy check mark the Stoic code for the modern man. Define your core values, and die by them if you must. Do the right thing, even when no one claps. Don't wear what fits the crowd, forge a path, even if it's lined with thorns. Speech balloons so next time you feel left out, misunderstood, or rejected, remember. No one is obligated to understand you, and you don't need them to be who you are. You were not born to ask for permission. You were born to stand firm, like a rock, while the world shakes around you. 2. Self-mastery is the foundation of real strength. Before you try to conquer anything out there, conquer what's in here. If you've come this far, and you've stopped waiting for the world's permission, then the next question is this: what now? The truth is, once you stop living for approval, you're left with something far more confronting. Yourself. And that's where the real battle begins. Because freedom without mastery? That's chaos. And chaos in the hands of a man without direction becomes destruction of dreams, of relationships, of potential. That's why Marcus Aurelius would remind you, as he reminded himself every day in his journals. You must learn to govern yourself before you can be trusted with anything else. The modern world has confused strength with aggression and confidence with noise. But the strongest men you'll ever meet don't need to raise their voices. They've tamed the wild parts of themselves. They've walked through the fire of emotional chaos and came out forged, not burned. Self-mastery isn't about suppression. It's not about becoming cold or emotionless. It's about understanding your emotions so deeply that they can't control you. You feel the anger, but you choose not to act on it. You feel the fear, but you move anyway. You feel the urge to lash out, prove yourself, shout your worth, but you remain still because you know your worth doesn't need to be shouted. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly paused before reacting? How often are your choices ruled by impulse, not intention? What would change in your life if your emotions reported to you, not the other way around? Marcus lived through betrayal, war, disease, and death. But he never let those storms break his inner calm. Not because he was born that way, but because he trained that way. Daily. Ruthlessly. Silently. He didn't just speak about discipline. He embodied it in how he woke, how he wrote, how he moved, how he led. His empire was in turmoil. His mind was not. So what does that look like today? It's waking up and not reaching for your phone first. It's journaling when your mind is chaotic. It's working out, not for the body, but for the discipline. It's learning how to respond, not react. It's walking away from arguments that don't serve you. It's choosing clarity over comfort. Stillness over stimulation. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming deliberate. Modern man is overstimulated, reactive, easily provoked. But the Stoic man? He's calm because he's trained. He's clear because he's cut the noise. He's powerful because he's in control, not of the world, but of himself. Marcus Aurelius didn't talk about self-mastery as a luxury. He saw it as the starting point of manhood. You want to lead? Master yourself. You want respect? Master yourself. You want peace? Master yourself. Because a man who has not mastered himself will seek control in others. A man who's ruled by emotion becomes a danger to his own purpose. You say you want freedom. You say you want success. But do you have the discipline to create it from the inside out? The first empire you must build is within. Brick by brick. Day by day. Not with swords and battles, but with restraint, clarity, and choice. Master yourself before the world masters you. 3. The world will test you daily, but your reaction is always your choice. You may not control what life throws at you, but you always control what you throw back. If mastering yourself is the starting point, then here's the next hard truth. The world won't stop testing you just because you've chosen discipline. In fact, it might test you harder. Because once you stop reacting impulsively, you begin to stand out. And standing out makes people uncomfortable. So they push. They provoke. They trigger. Not always out of malice, but often out of their own unconscious chaos. That's when the real test begins. Not in the moment when life is calm, but in the storm, when someone cuts you off in traffic, insults you publicly, betrays your trust, or questions your worth. What do you do then? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. And that wasn't just philosophy. That was armor. Self-mastery means nothing if it evaporates the moment someone disrespects you. Stoicism isn't about pretending pain doesn't exist. It's about refusing to let pain define you. It's about feeling the heat of emotion rise, but choosing not to let it take the wheel. Because here's the quiet truth every strong man eventually learns. It's not what happens to you that shapes your character, it's how you respond. So ask yourself, when someone disrespects you, do you rise to meet their chaos, or do you stand anchored in your own clarity? When disappointment strikes, do you spiral, or do you observe, breathe, and act with precision? When life feels unfair, do you fall into blame or do you rise into ownership? The world is loud. It demands instant replies, instant opinions, instant outrage. But you don't owe it that. You owe yourself calm. You owe yourself control. You owe yourself the dignity of silence when it matters most. Marcus didn't have social media. He didn't get bombarded with opinions, hot takes, and digital wars. But he had something we've nearly forgotten. The courage to pause. To sit in discomfort without reacting. To let emotion pass through without letting it poison his path. That is the essence of strength in a world that idolizes noise. Because every time you let a situation dictate your reaction, you give it power over you. You give your peace away like loose change. But when you pause, when you choose not to react, you reclaim your authority. You stop being a puppet pulled by the strings of provocation. And you become a man led by principle, not emotion. This is not weakness. This is not passivity. This is restraint. And restraint is not suppression, it is precision. It is knowing that not every insult deserves a response. Not every fight is worth entering. Not every battle is won by striking first, but by standing last. You want to know what makes a man unstoppable? It's not his muscles. It's not his job title. It's not the size of his bank account. It's his inner stillness in a world that is constantly shaking. So next time life throws fire your way, don't throw gasoline. Throw water. Throw silence. Throw wisdom. Your response is your strength. Own it. Protect it. Live it. 4. Discipline isn't punishment, it's an act of self-respect. A man who truly loves himself doesn't need to be forced to do what's right, he chooses it. You've now stepped through the first doors. You've stopped waiting for approval. You've begun mastering your emotions. You've reclaimed your response. But the question is, how do you maintain that clarity, that centeredness, every day, through all seasons of life? The answer isn't sexy. It's not trendy. It won't go viral. It's discipline. And Marcus will tell you, discipline isn't something that limits you. It's the very thing that sets you free. We live in a time where the word discipline is often misunderstood, seen as something harsh, rigid, even oppressive. But true discipline, the kind Marcus practiced daily, isn't about restriction. It's about devotion. Not to a god. Not to an audience. Not even to an end result. But to your own potential. To your own future. To that quiet voice inside that says, you were made for more than this. Marcus didn't wait to feel motivated. He didn't rely on moods, trends, or applause. He rose early. He trained his body. He trained his thoughts. He wrote relentlessly. He reflected constantly. Not because anyone told him to, but because he respected himself too much to live any other way. That's the difference between boys and men. Boys wait to be pushed. Men push themselves. Boys need reminders. Men are ruled by inner standards. Boys follow impulse. Men follow principle. So let's get honest. Are you building systems or just surviving moments? Do you have rituals or just habits of reaction? Are you leading your day or being dragged by it? Every day, you're either shaping yourself or you're being shaped by the noise. Every day, you're either building muscle or feeding weakness. Every day, you're either moving closer to clarity or drifting into chaos. Discipline is the only thing that bridges the gap between who you are and who you could be. But here's what no one tells you. Discipline doesn't start in the gym. It doesn't start with cold showers or waking up at 5 a.m. It starts in the mind. It starts the moment you decide that your life is worth showing up for, even when no one's watching. It starts when you realize that your energy, your time, your attention are the most sacred things you own. And that letting them be ruled by emotion, addiction, distraction is the slowest form of self-betrayal. Marcus wasn't a robot. He had fears. He had doubts. He had pain. But his discipline wasn't driven by perfection, it was driven by principle. He wrote not because he felt like it, but because he knew. If I don't shape my mind, the world will do it for me. And the world never has your best interest at heart. So, how do you build a life of calm, purpose, and clarity? You don't wait for it. You create it. One deliberate act at a time. You build it by choosing the hard thing when no one else is looking. By showing up consistently when you'd rather check out. By loving yourself enough to do what needs to be done, without needing to be told. That's not rigidity. That's not punishment. That's the highest form of self-respect. A disciplined man isn't perfect. He's simply committed. To his values. To his mission. To his future self. So while the world chases dopamine, distraction, and validation, you return to the foundation. The repetition. The ritual. The resistance. And through that, you rise. 5. Each day is a complete life. Don't let it slip by meaningless. Live as if today is your only chance to prove who you truly are, because it is. If discipline is your structure, then presence is your soul. And yet, this is the trap of modern man. To live surrounded by opportunity, yet be asleep to it. To breathe, but not be alive. To move, but not live deliberately. We scroll endlessly. We chase numbing comforts. We drown in endless tasks, but never stop to ask, did I actually live today, or just exist through it? Marcus Aurelius faced war, plague, political betrayal. But none of it ever distracted him from the one thing he feared most. Wasting a single day. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't poetry. It was a warning. A man who forgets his mortality becomes a slave to distraction. But the man who remembers it, he becomes urgent, present, and powerful. Let's get painfully honest. How many days have you let vanish into autopilot? How many mornings have you traded for dopamine? How many nights have you fallen asleep wondering where the day even went? The modern world doesn't want you present. It wants you sedated. It wants your attention, because attention is power. And if you don't take ownership of it, someone else will. That's why the Stoic doesn't wait for permission to live with depth. He doesn't wait for the weekend, for retirement, for a better season. He chooses to treat every day as an entire life. Because he knows. You don't have time. You have now. And you're spending it, whether you mean to or not. Here's what presence looks like. Starting the day with intention, not reaction. Looking people in the eye, not at a screen. Walking slower, not to be lazy, but to feel the ground. Saying what needs to be said, while you still can. Doing the one meaningful thing each day, before the distractions win. Marcus didn't meditate on death to be morbid. He did it to stay awake. To remind himself that time wasn't a promise. It was a gift. So ask yourself now, if today were the last chapter, would it be worth reading? This isn't about rushing. It's not about burning out or squeezing life dry. It's about living on purpose. It's about rising each day with the reverence of a warrior preparing for battle, because in a way, it is. You're battling laziness. You're battling forgetfulness. You're battling the pull of an empty life disguised as convenience. Let today be the day you decide. To stop scrolling through a life you were meant to write. To stop rehearsing what you'll do someday and do one small thing now. To stop waiting for clarity and start building it in real time. You don't need a near-death experience to wake up. You just need the courage to stop drifting and start showing up. Because each day truly is a full life. A beginning. A middle. An end. A chance to look at the man in the mirror and say, I honored the day. I showed up for myself. I didn't waste it. And if you do that, You'll string together not just great days, but a great life. Built moment by moment, choice by choice, fully awake. 6. Silence is an action. The man who speaks only when it matters is feared more than the one who speaks constantly. If you've begun to live with presence, if you've chosen to meet each day as if it's your last, then the next test comes quietly. It isn't announced. It doesn't look like a challenge. It sounds like a voice in your head saying, respond. Defend yourself. Be heard. But not every battle deserves your sword. Not every noise deserves your reply. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do as a man is to hold the line in silence. This isn't passive. This isn't avoidance. It's power. The modern world trains you to over-explain, to justify yourself, to engage in every argument, to react to every criticism, to defend every opinion. It tells you that to be a man is to be loud, opinionated, dominant in volume. But Marcus Aurelius would disagree. He would remind you, never let your tongue run ahead of your mind. Because real strength doesn't need to broadcast itself. Real strength doesn't panic when misunderstood. Real strength doesn't fight battles that compromise its center. Silence is not submission. Silence is a form of control. It's knowing that your energy, your time, your mental bandwidth are sacred. And that not every conversation, not every comment, not every challenge deserves your presence. Ask yourself, how much of your stress has come from speaking when silence would have been wiser? How many arguments have you regretted simply because you reacted too fast? How often have you tried to prove your worth rather than simply embody it? In an age where everyone's talking, the man who listens stands out. In a room full of noise, the one who speaks less commands the most attention. Because silence is mystery. Silence is intention. Silence is a signal that you're not swayed by external chaos, that you choose when and where your voice is earned. And this isn't just about avoiding drama. It's about cultivating inner stillness. The man who can sit with his anger, with his pain, with his confusion, without immediately reacting, is a dangerous man. Not because he's violent, but because he's unshakable. He doesn't respond to prove himself. He doesn't argue to be right. He responds only when it matters, and when he does, every word lands like a strike of lightning. The Stoics called it ataraxia, a state of unshakable tranquility. You don't get there by winning every debate. You get there by realizing that peace is more valuable than validation. That not every opinion is worth your attention. That your silence is often more effective than your best argument. So, the next time you're triggered, pause. When someone tries to pull you into their storm, pause. When the world demands a reaction, pause. And in that pause, you reclaim yourself. You remind yourself, you are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to stand for something deeper. Speak when it strengthens. Speak when it uplifts. Speak when it aligns with who you are, not who they want you to be. And the rest of the time? Hold the silence like a blade. Let your presence speak. Let your restraint echo louder than their noise. That is the Stoic way. That is the quiet revolution. That is the sound of a man who has nothing to prove, but everything to protect. 7. Do the right thing, even if no one sees it. The measure of a man is not what he does in the spotlight, but what he does in silence, when no one is watching. If you've embraced stillness, if you've learned to respond only when necessary, then this next lesson will challenge your core. Can you still do what's right, even when no one will ever know? In today's culture, where virtue is often performance, and morality is posted before it's practiced, doing the right thing quietly almost feels like a foreign concept. But to Marcus Aurelius, that was the only kind of integrity that mattered. He didn't write to impress. He didn't serve Rome for applause. He didn't hold back corruption because of cameras, there were none. He simply believed this. To be a man of value means acting in alignment with principle, not applause. It's easy to be good when it benefits you. Easy to be kind when it earns likes. Easy to help when it's visible. But the Stoic test of character comes when no one's watching. No one's clapping. No one's thanking you. No one even knows. And yet, you still show up. You still hold the door open. You still return the lost wallet. You still speak the truth that might cost you. Why? Because your actions aren't transactions. They're reflections of who you've chosen to become. Ask yourself, if no one ever praised your integrity, would you still live by it? If your discipline earned you no recognition, would you still maintain it? If your courage led to no applause, would you still choose bravery? This is the line between external validation and internal honor. Between being liked and being real. Between being rewarded and being rooted. Marcus Aurelius faced temptations to abandon his values every day. He could have indulged in the excess of power. He could have ignored corruption to preserve favor. He could have punished his enemies and silenced his critics. But he chose restraint. He chose justice. He chose dignity. Not because he'd be celebrated for it, but because he couldn't look in the mirror otherwise. That's what this is really about. Who are you when no one's looking? Are you still showing up? Still keeping your word? Still walking your talk? Or is your morality tied to attention? Does your compass point true, or only when people are watching? The Stoic knows applause fades. Reputation changes. But the man you become in the dark? That man lives with you forever. You want strength? Do the right thing without needing to be seen. You want respect? Earn it from yourself first. You want legacy? Build it in silence, with acts no one ever hears about, but you never forget. Because when your values are real, you don't need a stage, you need a spine. So the next time you're faced with a choice between what's easy and what's right, what looks good and what is good, what earns praise and what earns peace, choose the thing you'll still be proud of when the lights go out. Choose what aligns with your code, not their cheers. Choose what makes you a man of weight, not noise. 8. Solitude isn't a punishment, it's sacred time to build yourself. A man who can sit alone without distraction is a man who can't be manipulated. If you can stand in your truth, even when no one's watching, then the next evolution is this. Can you be alone with yourself and not run? In a world constantly pulling you outward. In a world that equates noise with relevance and loneliness with failure. Solitude has become one of the most misunderstood states a man can enter. But Marcus Aurelius didn't fear solitude. He sought it. Not as escape, but as refinement. Because he understood something most modern men have forgotten. You become who you truly are, not in crowds, but in quiet. The average man today is never alone. He may be physically isolated, yes. But his mind is chained to notifications, media, opinions, distractions. He may be home, but he's never home within himself. And that's why so many men feel lost. Because they've never actually sat down to meet who they are. Without noise. Without scrolling. Without escape. Ask yourself, when was the last time you were fully alone, with no phone, no agenda, no sound? When did you last sit in silence and ask, what do I actually think? What do I truly want? Can you even hear your own voice anymore, or have you outsourced your identity to the voices of others? The Stoic man understands. Solitude isn't an absence. It's an amplifier. It reveals what you believe. It surfaces what you've buried. It shows you who you are beneath performance, beneath expectations, beneath noise. But here's the part most people miss. Solitude isn't just about self-awareness. It's about self-reconstruction. It's where your philosophy becomes action. Where your thoughts become clarity. Where your wounds become wisdom. Marcus used solitude to write, to reflect, to reset. Not because he was weak, but because he knew that strength without silence becomes reckless, that action without reflection becomes noise, that a man who never retreats into himself becomes lost in the world's chaos. And this is the trap of modern masculinity: to confuse constant motion with progress, to fill every second to avoid the discomfort of stillness, to fear being alone, because in solitude, all your illusions collapse. But the Stoic embraces that collapse, because he knows, from the rubble of distraction, the real man emerges. So let this be your invitation: not to isolate, not to withdraw out of bitterness, but to return, purposefully, to your own space. Turn the noise off. Close the tabs. Leave the room. Sit in the silence long enough for the truth to rise. And when it does, don't flinch. Face it. Shape it. Use it. Because a man who knows how to be alone is a man who's forged his own inner ground. A man who cannot be seduced by noise. A man who doesn't chase belonging, because he already belongs to something deeper, his own truth. In solitude, you don't become less, you become more. More honest. More grounded. More whole. So while the world calls solitude loneliness, you will know the truth. It's not that you're alone. It's that you're finally undistracted enough to become yourself. 9. You can't change the world, but you can change yourself every single day. You're not here to complain about the chaos. You're here to become the kind of man who can withstand it. If solitude has taught you anything, it's that the most chaotic battlefield isn't out there. It's within you. And once you've faced yourself in silence, you no longer waste energy trying to fix a world that won't listen. Instead, you return to what matters most: your ability to change yourself. Every single day. Without fanfare. Without excuses. Without delay. Marcus Aurelius lived through war, plague, betrayal, and the collapse of empires. He didn't waste time asking, "Why is the world like this?" He asked, "Who must I become in response?" He didn't expect the world to make it easier. He didn't ask for fairness. He didn't curse the instability. He trained within it. He adapted inside it. He sharpened his mind, not to escape the chaos, but to endure it with grace. And yet today, many men are still waiting. Waiting for the world to be less broken. For politics to be less corrupt. For people to be less fake. For life to be more forgiving. But Stoicism doesn't teach you to wait for ideal conditions. It demands that you build ideal character regardless of conditions. So ask yourself, are you trying to control what's beyond you, or are you mastering what's within you? Are you blaming the world for your stagnation, or are you rising in spite of it? Are you reacting to life, or are you reshaping yourself to lead through it? This is the turning point for any man who wants peace. Stop trying to change the world before you've changed yourself. Because no matter how loud the outside gets, no matter how unpredictable the circumstances, the man who refines himself, disciplines himself, owns himself, that man becomes untouchable. You don't need a perfect world to become a powerful man. You need a consistent decision. To be better than you were yesterday. To speak with more truth. To act with more clarity. To stand with more purpose. Not because the world deserves it, but because you do. Because every day that you delay your growth, every time you deflect your responsibility, every time you wait for someone else to fix it, you surrender a little more of your power. But when you wake up and say, "This is on me. This is my character to build. This is my life to forge," something shifts. You become sovereign. You stop trying to control the storm and become the man who walks through it with his eyes open. You stop waiting for the world to be better and start making yourself the kind of man who can face it, unchanged. Marcus never said, "Change the world." He said, "Master your mind." He said, "Be good, even if no one sees." He said, "The obstacle is the way." And he lived that. In a collapsing empire, he stood grounded. While others chased control, he chose responsibility. You may not be able to rewrite the world, but you can rewrite your story every day. You can train your mind, discipline your body, elevate your spirit. And if you do that long enough, you won't need to change the world. You'll become the kind of man who changes everyone around him without even trying. 10. Peace doesn't come from a calm world, but from being unshakable within it. Don't wait for the chaos to end. Become the man who can walk through it without losing himself. Once you stop blaming the world, once you commit to changing yourself daily, you realize something deeper. Life will never stop testing you. The world won't pause for your peace. Storms won't ask permission to arrive. So the final battle is not out there. It's not against society, critics, or circumstance. It's the battle for your center, to stay calm when everything around you isn't. Marcus Aurelius never said peace would come when Rome stopped burning. He said peace came when he stopped being ruled by what was burning. He knew this truth. If you wait for the world to calm down, you'll never find rest. You'll be a man tossed by every headline, every betrayal, every unexpected change. But if you become anchored within, if your values are clear, your responses are intentional, and your heart remains still in the storm, then peace is yours. Not because the world is quiet, but because you are. That's the stoic edge. Not indifference, not numbness, but inner steadiness, a mind so trained, so deliberate, it cannot be hijacked by circumstance. So ask yourself, how often do you lose your peace over things you can't control? How easily do you give away your calm to strangers, tweets, or petty insults? Are you reacting your way through life, or choosing how to show up no matter what happens? Because here's the truth. Inner peace isn't passive, it's a fight. Not a violent one, but a daily one. You fight for it every time you choose stillness over panic. Every time you choose truth over noise. Every time you say, no matter what happens out there, I remain who I am in here. That's what made Marcus a force of nature. He didn't need things to go his way to be powerful. He didn't rely on praise, certainty, or comfort. His peace came from his posture, not his environment. So what does that mean for you? It means you stop letting peace be conditional. You stop saying, I'll be okay when. You stop waiting for the perfect season, the perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect day. And instead, you make a choice. To ground yourself in principle. To stand when others flinch. To breathe when others break. To lead, starting with your own nervous system. This is the Stoic way. Not escaping difficulty, but entering it with strength. Not silencing emotion, but not being ruled by it. Not chasing a fantasy of quiet, but becoming the kind of man who creates quiet within. So while the world spins, argues, burns, and rebuilds, you return to your breath. You return to your posture. You return to the truth that peace is a product of who you are, not where you are. Because when you become that man, the storm loses its power, and the world may stay chaotic, but you remain unshaken. And if there's one thing you need to do right now, it's not to wait for the world to calm down. It's not to wait for more motivation. It's not to wait for the perfect conditions. It's to choose to rise, in silence, in steadiness, in discipline. To live each day not waiting for the world to change, but to become the anchor others can hold on to when everything else falls apart. Start tomorrow. No, start now. Wherever you are, no matter what life is throwing at you, you can choose peace. You can choose control. You can choose to live like a Stoic. Unmoved. Undimmed. Unbroken. Peace doesn't come from anything outside of you. It begins inside, and the action you choose right now will decide everything. Maybe no one ever taught you how to lead yourself. Maybe no one ever told you that stillness is strength, that restraint is power. That the most unshakable man isn't the loudest, he's the most anchored. But now you know. And what you do with that knowledge, what you choose right now, that's where transformation begins. Because in a world of noise, chaos, and shallow performance, there's still room for a different kind of man. A man who lives by principle. Who chooses peace without asking permission. Who leads, starting with himself. If that's the kind of man you're becoming, then this is your place. Subscribe. Not for entertainment. Not for escape. But for the reminders you need to become who you were born to be. We're just getting started. And the next battle you'll face will be one worth winning.